Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Tabitha Wilson. I am board president of AVillage. AVillage was created in 2009 to address the most urgent and pressing needs of residents in the South End and beyond. Our vision is a just community where empowered people have equitable access to opportunity and resources. We identify inequities and confront their root causes by galvanizing the community and leveraging resources to create transformational change in Albany's South End. We prioritize marginalized voices, we fight systemic racism and oppression, we deliver strategic solutions, we are stronger together. Our issues are food sovereignty. Our work is rooted in the social determinants of health, health disparities, and medical racism, especially Black maternal morbidity and mortality, environmental justice, housing insecurity, disproportionate rent burden, improving the quality of life, and citizen advocacy with our Block Ambassador program, as well as working collaboration on beautification and gardens with the rabbits. And at this time, we are also spurring economic development and fighting food apartheid with our night market at our strategic location outside of South End Grocery. At this time, I want to welcome you all and thank you so much for joining us this evening in person and online. Thank you to the Albany Public Library. Thank you to the New York Civil Liberties Union of the Capital Region and Melanie Trimble for your gracious donation. Thank you. Thank you. Additionally, another sponsor is Youth Effects. We also thank the Albany Police Department for their sponsorship, is why we have dinner this evening. Thank you. And we also wish to thank Hamlin Visions for your gracious time and energy with capturing the audio-visual effects tonight. Thank you. So as part of course, there are bathrooms on site. You can leave and take care of yourself as you need. Come and go as you please. And I ask that if you can silence your devices so we don't have too many interruptions. So tonight, we of course have the conversation reimagining public safety through community oversight, which is born of a discussion to update the community, for one, give them background and insight on what the CPRB is and does, as well as the upgrades and changes that they've had to the passage of local law J. So with that, I would like to introduce and thank our participants, the staff and board of the CPRB. If you're present, Michelle Andre, Program Manager. Also, Shell Miller, Publications Editor and Community Events Organizer for the Government Law Center at Albany Law School. Board Member, Dr. Vanelia Hardin. Board Member, Batman, aka Paul Collins Hackett. Also, board members, Victor Pearson and Antoinette Santos. And we, of course, did invite the Chief of Police, who cannot be in attendance, but we thank him graciously for, of course, his attendance. At this time, I would like to turn it over to our evening's moderator, our Executive Director of AVillage and founder of Bridge the Gap, Eva Bass.
Hello, everybody. How you guys doing today? Thank you so much for having me. And I mean, Tabitha Wilson, give it up for her, the president of we appreciate all your hard work, and she does much more than most presidents do on organizations. So without further ado, we're going to first have a presentation from the CPRB giving you some information and insight. So I want to welcome Nairobi up to do the presentation.
Thank you, Eva, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be here tonight. We do want to just level set and give information about the board so that we all know what we're talking about, what the board is, and how it can be a resource to our community members. So here we have just some background on the board. It was established in November 2000, and you'll hear more from our panelists on the history and the establishment of the board. Basically, what the board is responsible for doing is creating and building trust between the community and the police department. We investigate complaints of police misconduct, and we are very serious about the mission. The board has been in its current state since about 2000 with some recent changes that I will speak about later. Our responsibilities include receiving and reviewing community complaints of alleged police misconduct, conducting independent investigations into alleged misconduct, reviewing investigations conducted by APB's Office of Professional Standards, or OPS, as you'll likely hear it called tonight, reviewing APD and OPS policies, collaborating with APD and OPS to develop a police disciplinary matrix, and providing police policy recommendations to the mayor, common council, and police chief. We meet monthly, and that is the second Thursday of every month. Our monthly meetings are a platform for community members to learn about what the board is doing. We always have a public comment period. We have reports from our committees. We have a report from the chair, yes, the corporation council, and others, so that we are always being transparent and keeping our community informed of what the work that we're doing. And I spoke about Local Law J. Likely everyone in this room is familiar with it, but for those who don't, in 2020 and 2021, it marked a very huge development for the board. Our community came together. The members of our common council voted unanimously to increase the powers of the board. Sorry, there's a little feedback. And our next slide will show the impact of Local Law J. So having an oversight agency in Albany is big, but with the legislation that is Local Law J, we got the ability to issue subpoenas. We got the authority to discipline. We got the authority to independently investigate, to establish a disciplinary matrix that will set clear guidelines for officers and community members on what is expected for police conduct. We can review and access APD policy, and we also provide language access for those who have limited or non-English proficient skills. So Local Law J was huge for us, and we thank everyone who was helpful in passing that. The civilian complaint process. So we are a resource to help the community members, as we said, voice their concerns through their complaints. The public can file a complaint against a member of APD for what they think is improper conduct. You can use our website, email, or mail to file a complaint. You can also find and access a board member if you know one of us personally, but we are always willing and able to help. Our complaint form is also available in English and Spanish, and you can access that through our CPRB website. So before Local Law J, the board was just a review model, and that is important when we talk about the changes that Local Law J brought about. We would, the board would review the reports that OPS put together from their investigation. We would make findings or recommend changes based on that report and OPS's investigation. After Local Law J, as I mentioned, we have the power to investigate on our own. We can do that with or without a complaint that is filed through OPS. So Local Law J, as I said, was huge for the CPRB and huge for complainants as to what happens when you do have an incident of misconduct and how to file your claim. And this is just an illustration. It's small, but we can also provide this in another form, but just showing the flow of what happens and when you file a complaint. We also, in addition to our investigators, have always had monitors that can, and there are mandates within our code that require certain violations of civil rights or excessive use of force, where we are to have a monitor assigned to the case and follow the OPS investigation. So we are making strides in the structure of our investigation and monitoring process. both forms still exist. The findings, this is important to many who file a complaint to know what happens once the investigation is complete. We can either find sustained, not sustained, exonerated, unfounded, ineffective policy or training, or no finding. And those are the definitions for the categories. We have also been working hard to improve the mediation process. The mediation provides an opportunity for members of their complaint in an alternative route where there's no findings of wrong, but there is an opportunity to discuss between the officer or officers involved and the member of the community. This has been an underutilized function of the board, but Dr. Hardin and Reverend Collier are working hard to build up our mediation program, model it after some other oversight agencies, and use this as a forum for community members and officers to, again, build that trust and have an alternative to punitive results through the complaint process. And we are also, per our mandate from Local Law J, in the process of developing a discipline matrix for APD. We have community stakeholders, members of APD, members of the police union, and members of the board who have come together and will be working in a public work group format bi-weekly throughout February, March, and hopefully we can conclude shortly after that. But we're working hard to make the process understandable and accessible for the community. If you can, you'll also see that there is a QR code on the screen. If you can, we do have a quick survey. We would like to make this process as public and inclusive as possible. So we're asking for our community to provide their feedback through the survey. But the disciplinary matrix, as I mentioned earlier, gives it was part of the recommendations from the CNA racial bias audit that was conducted on APD. And it just gives an opportunity for members of the public to understand, and members of APD to understand what to expect when certain violations happen. And here is our contact information. If there is a question about anything we discussed tonight, about how to file a complaint, about the matrix process, or anything that you would just like to add that you don't feel comfortable speaking to tonight or at one of our public meetings, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to interact with us on our Facebook page. And that is it. So I will turn it back over to Eva for the start of our panel.
Thank you so much, and a wonderful presentation that was. All right. Technical things going on here. All right. Can you guys hear me on there? I need somebody to respond. No, not you, the people on Zoom. We have some guests.
So they can hear it.
Okay, good, perfect. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your patience. Now for the fun part, our panelists. So I'm going to introduce our panelists just by name, because some of them I can go on and on, especially about the first person. Barbara Smith, one of my idols, and definitely a great leader in the City of Albany and around the nation. We have Mark Mishler, who is a community advocate, lawyer, and so many other things in this community. We have Nairobi Vives. She is with the CPRB, and she does so many other things in the community. We have Officer Anthony, are you Italian? Battuello, Battuello.
That's one.
Okay, Battuello. Yep, he did it. And Officer Joshua, you have both Italian? Oh, okay, then separated themselves. Pronounce your last name for me? Laiacona. All right. And I want to thank you guys all today. You have copies of the questions here. And I'm going to get started with question 1. Guys ready? And this is for everyone. And so you can either start left to right or right to left or kind of popcorn. Can you briefly introduce yourself, describe your role in policing oversight, or community oversight of policing? So I'm gonna start with Barbara Smith, since she has the historic knowledge.
Should I be using this microphone or coming to the podium?
You can use that microphone, and that one is just for you.
Okay, and thank you so much. It's nice to be here in Albany. I am no longer an Albany resident, full disclosure, but obviously I'm nearby. My relationship to policing, I lived in Arbor Hill for, about 34 years. And I personally experienced the need to be in contact with the Albany Police Department because of things that were happening, and including gun violence around me, not necessarily toward me or directly, but living in a context in which policing was of great importance. I got to know some people in the police department at that time, and also even before that period, I lived elsewhere in Albany a few years before I moved to Arbor Hill, and I've been here in the city since in the area now since 1984. But I was absolutely aware that there were issues, as with most police departments, between the community and the police department, and that there were instances of police brutality. So I had a consciousness about what was going on in my neighborhood, but also I had an overall view of how the relationships between the Albany police and particularly people of color, African Americans, people, Black people, not all of us are African Americans, but that there were, and also people who were brown, indigenous, etc., that there was tension in those regards. I was concerned about the functioning of the police department, and really it was police issues that motivated me to run for Common Council. Long before there was a Community Police Review Board, there was something called the Community Police Relations Board. And that was what was in existence when I moved to Albany. And because I knew someone who was involved with that, namely Vicki Smith, who is now president of the school board, Vicki was involved with that back in the mid-1980s. So I actually used to go to those meetings. And as I said, that was before a CPRB actually existed. The CPRB started at a particularly historic moment, not just in Albany, but in New York State history and also in national history, it started not because of the Amadou Diallo trial, but it started, that legislation was in front of the Common Council as that trial ended. And I remember Mark and I talking about that because we were out having actions, visible actions around the trial of the police officers who killed Amadou Diallo. And he said, well, you know that the legislation is being considered. So I actually was at the council meeting, I believe, when the first legislation was voted on and approved. So that goes back a number of years. Eventually, I became a member of the Common Council, ran for office in 2005 and began serving in 2006. And I was vice chair of the Public Safety Committee during my first term, and I was chair of Public Safety during my second term. So I had day-to-day responsibility in relationship to all of our public safety entities, including the police, the fire department, and also codes. And got to find out, went on the ride along, got to find out about what some of the job was. And also, particularly during my second term, got to be actively involved in a period when I believe that the police department took a serious turn towards community policing and had some leadership that was really very positive, many of us thought, for our community. So I think that's probably enough for now. Now, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Hi, good evening, can you all hear me?
Yes, if you can speak closer to the mic, because they're saying it's hard to hear on Zoom.
How is this? Is that better? Hi, everybody, I'm Mark Mishler, and I'm gonna try to cram a lot of information in about 3 minutes right now, so let me just get started on it. So just very briefly about myself, so I've lived in Albany since the very early 1980s. I got involved in the issue of police misconduct and lack of accountability on the part of the Albany Police Department early in the 1980s, particularly after Jesse Davis was murdered by the Albany Police in 1984. And that was sort of one of what turned into a series of catastrophic events of brutality on the part of the Albany Police Department that each time, and I'll go through quickly a few of them, each time has led to some progress and some community movement and activity, and basically, always centered within the African American community in Albany, but also always much beyond the African American community, demanding accountability and demanding an end to brutality and racism in the police department. I was part of that effort in 1984, along with Dr. Alice Green. I drafted what was actually the first concrete proposal for a citizen police review board in Albany, which was presented by the NAACP at that time. And then I was also part of the first iteration of what Barbara described, the Community Police Relations Board, which was formed by Mayor Whalen in 1986. This board had no actual power, except there were some of us on the board who seized on the opportunity that there were regular meetings of this board, that the police department was represented at these meetings, and the press was always at these meetings, to at least make the most that we could make of what little access we had to information. That board was mostly of little value, although a number of people valiantly tried to give it value. There have been several other efforts over the years to create a review board. There was an effort in the early 1990s that came before the Common Council and was voted down. There was an effort in the mid to late 1990s as well. And then in 1999, there was another one of these crises, which was that there was an incident in Arbor Hill where 2 police officers had been shot by, allegedly by an individual named Tracy Grady, who was not apprehended. And so it's a terrible thing that the officers were shot. What happened after that, though, really created another outpouring of activity and concern, which was that the APD essentially shut down an entire neighborhood and went on locked down an entire neighborhood in Arbor Hill and went on a house-by-house search for Mr. Grady. There were many instances where people were mistreated in that process. Out of that grew another effort to start a review board. The way it started was that then Common Councilmember Carolyn McLaughlin convened a group to draft on the board. We met in what was this little basement storefront on Clinton Avenue. We met a number of times over a period of months. We drafted a proposal. Carolyn submitted it and filed it with the Common Council. And the then Mayor Jennings, for whatever reason, had another proposal drafted, which was not as strong as the one that Carolyn had submitted. And so that was also submitted. So then there were 2 competing proposals before the Common Council. The mayor said, oh gee, there's 2 proposals, what do we do? So he created a task force that spent a good part of a year sort of trying to figure out what do we do with these 2 proposals. The task force came up with the basic structure of what then was eventually adopted in 2000 as the beginning of the Citizen Police Review Board. As compared with what our group had drafted, this board had no subpoena power, had no direct power to investigate allegations of misconduct, and no power in regard to even recommending discipline that could be imposed. But so that's how the board started. A number of us at that time, so we were glad that a board was being created, but also had a lot of caution about whether this was really going to be able to do the work that was necessary. Fast forward to this past couple of years when local law J was passed, the board finally has the power and the authority that it needs in order to really perform the work of being a citizen oversight panel on the Albany Police. Along the way, so I'm also a lawyer. I'm starting in the early '80s. I've litigated cases of police misconduct against the City of Albany. So I've litigated numerous cases. I think that's given me a lot of insight into how the police department actually works. Also a criminal defense lawyer, and that has given me a lot of insight into how it works. And I think, and I know I'm probably over my time, but
Just a little bit. Go ahead,
half a minute more. Thank you. What I want to say is I think that Barbara mentioned there was a brief period where things were different about 10 or 12 years ago. Since then, I believe that we are back to a situation where the Albany police regularly violate people's rights and are not held accountable. And I can cite numerous examples of this. The biggest example, because it's gotten quite a lot of, or two, they've gotten a lot of publicity. One is an incident on First Street in 2019, horrible violations of people's rights that night, and no police officer was ever effectively held accountable for their conduct that night. And then in 2021, when Black Lives Matter activists had an encampment outside of South Station that lasted a week, when that was broken up by the police quite violently and brutally, and unnecessarily violent and brutal, as people may remember, most of the officers in this sort of military takedown of this peaceful activist encampment had covered their names or covered their badges, which is a clear violation of rules. And this was widespread. Almost every officer had covered their badges or their name tags. And the police department then issued a report after a long investigation that basically absolved anybody of any misconduct. Nobody was held accountable for that quite flagrant violation of people's rights and for accountability. So that's where we are now. Not in a good place, except that the board now has some real power, which is really good, and there's community activity and community engagement in a deep way. And I think that many of us have learned a lot in the past several years, from George Floyd and so forth. And so I'm hopeful looking forward that we can move forward in a positive way, but we're absolutely not there yet. And thank you for indulging me the extra.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nairobi Vives. I am the current chair of the CPRB. I am born and raised in Albany, have been here all my life. I am an attorney as well. I joined the board at a time when Mark talks about like big events that are happening unintentionally. I applied to be on the board in April of 2020, and as we all know, in June of 2020, we had the George Floyd murder that changes all of our lives. So I started my time on the board in June of 2020. I had joined at a time in my legal career thinking I went to law school, I was gonna help people, I was gonna be the next Thurgood Marshall and all these other things, and that was not what I was doing. So I'm having this crisis and I'm talking to my husband, I'm like, I have to do something. I have one more day, I can apply to be on this board. I had previously tried to do a lot of pro bono work, but that doesn't always happen when you have a job and you have kids and things like that. So I was like, this is where I can be the most effective. And we laugh every day because I remember saying to him, Oh, it won't be much more than, one meeting a month, and I'll have to review some cases, but, I'll be good. And now, like tonight, he is at home watching our 2 kids, thank you, honey, I love you. So it morphed from me, just having this urge to help, many of the people that I've grown up with who have had interactions with the criminal justice system, who would come to me regularly, and I would oftentimes refer them to Mark or somebody else who actually was doing this type of work. I don't do this, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And it just created this desire in me to do more and help. And now I'm on the board. We are at a time where we are asking for more power, and this is under the leadership of our former chair, Ivy Morris, who I always have to shout out because she was such a great leader, so supportive of this new person on the board that's asking for all these changes, and we just have such a great group. But unfortunately, as we all know, changes happen, and often a Black person has to lose their life for that. But we took heed for the moment that we were in time, fought and pushed for some big changes, and we are where we are now. I became the chair after that, and we just continue to fight. We have a great team, and that's really it for me. But I'm very grateful to be a part of the board, very grateful to see everybody here in this room today.
Good evening, everybody. First, I'd like to thank certainly the CPRB, Ms. Vives, and all the board members that are present here today, as well as AVillage, for inviting us here to take part in this conversation, and certainly the public library for hosting the event. It wasn't that long ago I was sitting out there when the CPRB used to host the monthly meetings here when I was in internal affairs as a detective. My name is Anthony Battuello. I'm Deputy Chief of Police for our City of Albany Police Department. I oversee our administration. I have a partner in Deputy Chief Vin Foley, who oversees our operations for the police department. As far as police oversight goes, I'm in my 19th year of service, for our city and for the police department. Out of that 19, I'm currently in my 11th year of service as a supervisor, as a sworn supervisor. I've held each rank in our department from sergeant, lieutenant, commander, and now deputy chief. With that comes responsibility of overseeing our personnel, obviously, both sworn and non-sworn in the police department. But more specifically, with that and holding some other specialized unit positions within the department, I've held several different positions and stints within our Office of Professional Standards, also known, commonly referred to as internal affairs. Back in 2010, I became a detective with the unit, which is not a popular choice. To be honest, transparent here in this discussion. With that comes, again, great responsibility and a lot of criticism, both internally and externally. That was my first review and kind of exposure to what police oversight really is, well before some of the discussions that we're probably prepared here to have tonight. Misconduct wasn't prevalent, thankfully, in my time as a detective in the office, but I certainly was exposed to several off-duty instances as well as community complaints. After I moved on from that position and became a supervisor, I returned to the unit just several years ago as a commander, overseeing both OPS, Office of Professional Standards, as well as our Administrative Services Bureau. Again, that's a different role, obviously, because now you're supervising these investigations as opposed to conducting them as a detective. Again, great responsibility that Commander Laiacona will be going into more depth with his presentation. As a deputy chief, I now take part in recommending and advising our chief of police, Chief Hawkins, with the recommendations that come out of Office of Professional Standards that I once used to do to enact the discipline that we see with violations of policy based on the outcome of those investigations. I won't take up all this 3 minutes. I'm sure there'll be questions about this later on in our discussion. But taking place in the police collaborative several years ago certainly has sparked more change within the department, and change is never comfortable. but it's something that we're prepared to do and that we continue to strive for. So again, thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion tonight.
Hi, good evening. My name is Joshua Laiacona. I am the commander of the Office of Professional Standards. I'm also the commander of our training unit that deals with policy, reviewing policy and procedure in the Albany Police Department. I also am the director of our police academy as well. I'm not going to take as much time as some of the other panelists did. I think we should probably just get into the discussion and get the good meat and potatoes of tonight. I was also previously an internal affairs detective. I'll echo what the deputy chief said. It certainly wasn't a popular position, I'd say, in the department, but I think a necessary one and a noble one, I would say. So that's about all I have to say. I'm sure we have a lot more to say in these discussions coming forward. Thank you.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, everyone. And, it's just very important. There's so much history, so we cannot crunch it in 3 minutes. So we really appreciate Barbara and Mark both elaborating. You guys kind of went into the next question. Albany is one of 3 cities in the state with investigative-focused civilian police oversight agencies. So the question was for Barbara and Mark. You were involved in the development of the board back in 2000. Can you describe the origin of CPRB? So you guys touched on it. Can you guys probably take about no more than a minute if you missed anything?
The one thing I would say, I was not involved in the forming of the board in 2000, but I think that probably the most important thing to understand about that period is that there were those 2 pieces of legislation, and one of them had what people described as teeth, and the other one was much less power. I'm sorry, I can't think of the right word, but much less agency for the CPRB. And the one that eventually passed was the one, as we often said, was the one without teeth. So this effort to get to the point of local law J has been a really long trajectory and a really important one. So we're at a time of opportunity, I would say, in relationship to the CPRB.
Thank you. Mark?
I didn't realize until I had stopped talking before that I merged together 2 questions. So okay. I won't say anything more. I took up too much time the first time. I think I explained my role in the initial creation of this board.
All right, thank you so much. So for Mark and Barbara, once again, this is a 3-part question because you guys have a lot of history, so you guys are first. Can you share some reflections about how the board has evolved since the founding? Second part, how does the board's current structure and authority align with the initial goals? Where and what are some possibilities for the future?
I don't presume to have expertise about this question, but I will say I've attended a number of CPRB meetings over the years. And when I first started attending them, right around the time probably that I began to serve on the Common Council, it was a very different kind of process. That sounds like my phone, but I know I turned mine off. Every time I hear it, I think, didn't I turn that thing off? But be that as it may, there was a rigidity to the proceedings. It was like boilerplate or rubber stamping of the process. And another thing I'd like to ask you, Nairobi, when you describe the business meetings of the CPRB now, do people who bring complaints actually appear? I assume they appear before the board, but is the public allowed to be at those?
Yes, complainants are allowed to come into the meetings if they choose and if they want to share their identity. And the public too is available to be, or is allowed to be in our meetings and have a public comment as well.
And I appreciate your saying that because the meetings I attended, indeed, complainants were there. And I got to see that process as well. So I don't really, as I said, have a lot to say about how it evolved, except that I have seen over the years that it's gotten stronger and stronger with the kinds of buy-in from the community and also with the kinds of people who have committed themselves to be a part of it. One of my responsibilities when I was on the council was to be involved in the interviews of people who were interested in being on the board. So I had some input into the deliberation of the people who were chosen. As I said, over the years, I think the board has become stronger and stronger. There was a lot in those early meetings that I used to attend back in the mid-2000s. There was a huge amount of hostility coming from the board itself around the process of doing oversight. And I was like, what's this about? But anyway, so as I said, I think things have gotten better. And I think, I won't say much more about that, but as I said, I think that there's a vitality now and a vibrancy with the board that excites me, and I think we see that this evening.
Mark?
Thank you. So I think, and I certainly agree with what Barbara said, that the board that exists now is vastly different from the board that started in 2000, from the board, various permutations of the board, membership that existed, really up until maybe about 5 years ago. And there was a lot of hostility. The leadership of the board for many years appeared to view their job as not as really providing community input and community oversight, but as shielding the police, protecting the police, and being apologists for the police. And, I experienced this numerous times, representing individuals who had filed complaints before the board and being present at board meetings where people were, really disrespected, and where, both in terms of the way, the process that was followed, in terms of the almost automatic acquiescence by the leadership of the board and whatever the police department had said, and really a level of hostility. And so that, not to pile on the praise, but that did begin to change when Ivy became chairperson of the board. It's really true. And I think Ivy and a cohort that came in at that time, which also includes Dr. B and others, some who were still on the board, brought a strong commitment to making the board live up to its promise. And the promise of being community oversight over the actions of the police, so that there could be improved police-community relations, and so that everybody could in fact be safer in the city of Albany. And and then that has followed. And so parallel to new leadership, of course, other things were happening in the world, right? So in Albany, 7 or 8 years ago, the police murdered Dante Ivy. Again, essentially nobody was held accountable for that. There was another massive outpouring at that time of community outrage and community engagement. I'm sure, Barbara, maybe you were off the council this time already, but I think Corey was on, occupying the common council chambers during the common council meeting. I mean, there was a lot of very militant activity that followed the death of Dante Ivy, disruption of the mayor's State of the City address one year. And that engagement, that activism, that community involvement also, I think, worked in conjunction with the new leadership of the board in the sense of, activists helped to spur the leadership of the board. The leadership of the board was showing activists that there were people who cared and were trying to make a difference. And so there was a convergence there. And then, with the, with the murder of George Floyd, of course, all around the country, there was, an awakening and an engagement, a level of involvement across the country that was really unprecedented. I think many people view it as really a nationwide uprising against racism and police brutality, and many positive things came of that. And I think we're in a period now where we're really, how lasting are the changes that came from the George Floyd uprising? Some are lasting. Albany passed local law J. And it's important to note, this was not just the Common Council. The citizens of the City of Albany voted on this in a referendum, and it passed overwhelmingly. So the people of the City of Albany want and show that they want real oversight powers for the board. And so I think that in turn then, of course, gives the leadership of the board strength in moving forward with this process of implementing the changes that were brought about by local law J. So I feel very positive. I think there's a lot of work to do, but I think that we're in a place to get some work done. And I also just the other point I want to make about this is the board, citizen oversight, even really effective, powerful citizen oversight is but one piece of a much larger puzzle of, the title of this program is Reimagining Public Safety. And there are many other parts of that. And just briefly, we know that communities that are the safest are not the communities with the most police, or the most active police, or the most visible police. Communities that are the safest are communities where people have decent and affordable housing, where the sidewalks are repaired, where the schools are good, where people have access to decent jobs, where people have real accessible access to healthcare and mental health care, and where communities have a sense of revitalization and engagement and trust. Those are communities that are safe. Communities that are over-policed, where the answer to everything is send in the police, are not the most safest. They are, in fact, the most violent, and violence that comes from community individuals, which causes real harm, which we cannot ignore, but also violence that comes from law enforcement. So, citizen oversight is incredibly important. The police are here. They have a lot of power. They wield a lot of authority. They have guns. They use their guns. They can stop people. They can detain people. They can take away people's liberty. They can go into people's homes. Really enormous power, and that's power that has to be checked. There have to be checks and balances, and there has to be oversight. So that's incredibly important. But really, we need to build these other elements in Albany that will make Albany safe for all. Just on housing, this enormous amount of luxury housing being built in the city of Albany in the past period of time. That does not help make our community safer. We need affordable housing. There's very little affordable housing being built, and there's a housing crisis in Albany. That's just one piece of it. So, we all need to be involved in every piece of it.
Thank you so much, Mark. So I would love to think about the City of Albany as being an equitable place for everybody to have opportunity and access to resources. And that includes protection, being safe, and also having the ability to make complaints and to get the feedback they need in the direction they need. So I want to really appreciate not only the founders and the creators and the ones that really took the many years to build the CPRB, but also the ones that are taking on the torch to make it greater moving forward. So Nairobi, I will bring you in. And if we fast forward to today, since the passage of local law J in 2021, the CPRB has entered a transitional period with new powers and resources. as the chair, what changes did local law J bring to the CPRB?
That's a good question, and I went over in our presentation some of our new responsibilities, everybody is pretty familiar with local law J. You know that the board changed and was able to now investigate on its own without necessarily a complaint that goes through APD. We have the power to discipline, and we have the power to recommend changes to policies with more feedback from the chief. We have the stronger subpoena power, and all of those very important things. But what the work of what we do and what has changed since local law J, I would say like the responsibilities have heightened. The need for resources have definitely heightened. The amount of work that we do has definitely increased. But the main change is that, and Mark touched on it, the transition from our board, what it was in the past, kind of just seen as a board that rubber stamped what APD did to now. And I try to, in the conducting of our meetings and things, I just try to just remain professional, and I don't always talk about the emotional part of it. But seeing our community come together, like Mark talked about, it wasn't just the common council that voted. Like, we really appreciated the support that we got from the members of the common council on the passage of the local law J. But seeing all of the work that went on behind the scenes with community members, just seeing the numbers once local law J passed, it was really overwhelming, and it was kind of a reckoning moment for myself, and I think everyone else on the board, that what we're doing is so important, and our community really believes in us and has put, a lot of trust in us. So every day it is that looking back to our mission, looking back to what we accomplished, and making sure that we are staying true to our community. So one of the biggest changes, or not changes, but one of the biggest things that I try to do as chair with local law J is make sure that the stakeholders that ask for this, they might not be on the board. I'm a true believer when we talk about, civic participation and whether or not our community votes and those sorts of things. I think that civic participation looks like a lot of different things. I study political science, and I think that our community voices its concerns and votes in a different way. If we pretend like we don't hear them when they come to our meetings and ask for certain things, I think that is just disingenuous in a form of gaslighting. So I like to honor what our community came out and asked for very clearly, and try to respect that with, making sure we give opportunities for public comment, and just making sure we follow facts when we are looking at investigating cases. We can't always come out with an outcome that you would want, but making sure that everyone is respected, everyone is heard, everyone is included in the process. Those things are very important to me. The perception of the board and the effectiveness for our community, and also being part of our mission, like I said in the beginning, is that bridging that gap and building trust. And I feel like we have to be examples in that, and we have had several instances since local law J passed, where we had to work with APD and OPS. We had to come up with an information sharing agreement. We had to then negotiate a confidentiality agreement. And it was difficult. It was new for everyone. There was some missteps, and we talked about it, but we continue to work through it together and try to, live as an example as what we want to do. So those are some of the more intangible changes from local law J. I hope that answers the question.
No, wonderful response. Thank you so much. And so when we think about allocation of resources, do you feel that the CPRB is well funded and able to accomplish what's needed under the CPRB?
I'm gonna say a resounding no. We do not have enough funding to really give the people what they voted for. We were just talking about this today. The group of people that we have on this board, the one and a half, I'll say, with Shell, it feels like two now, but the amount of work that we get done with Michelle, with Shell, with the interns from the law school, with our consultants, with our volunteer board members. It is remarkable, but what we could really do as a fully funded board, we had some conversations with Rochester. I believe their budget is like $5 million. They have like 33 staff members, and we were talking to them about some of the things they were able to accomplish with their disciplinary matrix, and we were like, wow, like so we're very excited that our budget did increase. We are very good stewards of the money that we do have, but we also know that we can't, and this came up at our last board meeting, just being very transparent of the current budget that we have. There is no way that we can fully investigate every complaint of alleged misconduct that comes through. So we have to kind of triage, prioritize what gets investigated, then the next step, what gets monitored, then the next step, what gets reviewed by our board members. And that brings us back to, what maybe a little more bells and whistles, but brings us back to our original model. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, going back to the original question, just to make sure that the changes that were brought about since local law J, that we are continuing to respect the passage of that legislation and what our citizens call for.
Thank you so much. And you touched on it a little bit, but who serves on the CPRB and how is that decided?
Our board is made up of residents of Albany. We have some board members here, we have former board members here, but that is a political appointment. The common council gets to appoint 5 members. The mayor gets to appoint 4 members, and it's usually a publicly shared application process once there is a vacancy on the board. So like I talked about when I came onto the board, I saw the advertisement on social media and then applied, had to interview with the common council and was appointed through the common council.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And good pick, common council Corey Ellis, appreciate it. So when it comes to community, I do want to say that as a community advocate, I get complaints all the time, and I'm just like, okay, everybody, I know I'm Eva, but I can't do everything. But the board and the people who work with the CPRB have been so responsive. I've been able to reach out via Facebook, email, text message, and just try to bridge that gap and get people connected. But if a community member does experience or witness a possible misconduct, what is the measures and how do they actually report it officially?
So there are a number of ways you can, we recently revamped our website so that community members can submit a complaint directly to us on our website. You can still always submit a complaint to AVD. You can mail, you can email a complaint to the board as well with the contact information that we gave. But we are also, Batman is floating around here being a superhero somewhere, but our board members are out in the community a lot. If you see one of us, Dr. V, Batman, I know Victor is at our tabling events. Our newest member, Tony, she is always in the community as well. Myself, when I'm not at home with kids, I try to come outside sometimes. Like if you see any of us, you can text, email, and just let us know that there's something going on. We are sensitive to the fact that some people are fearful to come forward. So you can do so anonymously. You can do so through another person that is willing to submit a complaint on your behalf. But we can work with just about anybody. And then just quick tie into the resource piece of it. One piece of when we were fighting for an increased budget, something that one of our former board members, Larry Becker, he was a big proponent of, and I too am a big proponent of, is sort of a community liaison person that can help people through this complicated process, help people when they are, maybe they have experienced some police misconduct, it's a traumatizing period in their life, and just might need help navigating, or as Larry used to say, someone to just sit with them and go through the interviews or what have you. That is something that we definitely want funding for, to recognize, that this is hard on the people that are going through it and want to provide resources to help with that. So we're continuing to work on that, but, just, another plug for what we would do if we had more resources.
Thank you so much. And you touched on something that's very important, is the fear, right? We need to create better relationships between community and our police department. Albany, the City of Albany champions community policing on a very high level. We need to take the action steps to be able to heal the trauma that has been made in the past, and we need to be able to create solutions for the future so that we can have a more cohesive relationship to create safety in our neighborhoods. So thank you for uplifting that point. Lastly, what is the typical time of an investigation? And if it does take a long time, why would that be?
So, that question is a little difficult to answer because there is no typical time. In the statute, there are parameters for turnaround time for if it's more the review model for OPS to complete an investigation and get that report to the CPRB, and that's about 30 days. And then for the CPRB to review within 60 days and make its findings. That has taken longer for a lot of reasons. One, case by case, it varies. Two, now with our new powers, just building up the structure, we did publicly announce that we were going to fully investigate 4 different incidents in 2022. And we had to go through the process of actually getting the infrastructure together to do so. So we had to hire investigators and get a case management system going. Some of the things that the board in its past form didn't really have to worry about. So that on the CPRB side, that is where some of the length has come from. But we are continuing to work on the process so that it is a very faster turnaround, so the process is more effective and meaningful for people. But I will let OPS and Commander and Deputy Chief talk about the length of investigations on the OPS side.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we're moving on to the police department. Deputy Chief and Commander, do you mind because I do not want to butcher your name a whole bunch of times. I apologize. But Deputy Chief and Commander, the Community Police Review Board was created to address community concerns and alleged police misconduct in the City of Albany. There is also an agency within the police department that is intended to address these misconducts. Can you give us an overview of the process of APD and the Office of Professional Standards when you receive a report of misconduct?
So hi, my name is Josh Laiacona. I'm the commander of the Office of Professional Standards, commonly probably referred to, people would know it better as internal affairs. So upon receipt of any complaint that comes in, the first thing that happens is the lieutenant of the unit who runs the day-to-day operations basically triages the complaint for the severity of it, the allegations, what the allegations actually are, and then he prioritizes that based on the nature of the complaint. It's then assigned to a detective, and then the detective usually directly reaches out to the complainant, does an interview, and the investigation is ongoing from there. That's pretty much the simple process of it.
All right, thank you so much.
I was just gonna add that, I figure you wanna hear from the current commander, not the old guard, so, that is still current in place. And then obviously at the end of those investigations, if OPS does have a recommendation, for disciplinary action to be taken against that employee, both sworn and non-sworn alike, that recommendation is presented to the chief of police. In that council is typically myself, again, my partner, Deputy Chief Foley, and then we counsel with the chief after the commander presents his recommendation based on the outcome of those investigations. The chief weighs all that information to form his decision on what action to be taken against the employee.
Thank you for that insight. And now I have a question. Is there, accountability to be accountable? Is there a way for, if there's a complaint going down the track, is there somebody besides the CPRB who is looking over that to make sure that's fulfilled?
Yeah, that would be the lieutenant and myself.
Perfect, thank you so much. So you hear it here. Okay, and so how would a person make a complaint? Would they go on a website? Is there a link? What is the process?
I think Nairobi, kind of, answered that
Oh,
question
it's the same process.
pretty well. But, as far as for us, any station that you can go to, has complaint forms at them, that are available to the public. You can come directly to headquarters and request to speak with an OPS detective, directly, business hours, Monday through Friday. But a lot of, citizen complaints, especially lately, have been coming in through, the CPRB, and I think that's, a testament to their success in getting some information out to the community and how they can get complaints into them, to the government law center.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so very much. So this question is for Nairobi, and I'm like messing up. And Deputy Chief and Commander,
Josh is fine.
Josh, okay, thank you, because I was like, I don't wanna. Okay, can you briefly share what, you are hopeful about what you are hopeful about with regards to the future of police oversight in the City of Albany?
My vision for the board is like I'm really inspired by this room full of people post COVID-19, the people that we have online. My hope is for continued engagement with our community, more funding and resources for the board. I hope that one day, we reach that utopia phase and there are no incidences and we are all live happily ever after. I think that is a long time coming, but in the meantime, to continue to have this dedicated board that will eventually get fully funded, will be able to be a resource. Like I talked about, I'm really hopeful about being able to repair some of the damage that our community members have experienced and have the board be able to fulfill that. But I also know, I think Mark had commented on this before, that we are one piece of the overall picture when it comes to public safety, when it comes to reform. So I hope to continue. We've done a really good job with partnering with stakeholders and organizations and just continuing to build that community. And that's my vision, that's my hope, and I'm loving it because I'm seeing it happen now. So I just hope we continue down that path.
I hope to, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well said, Nairobi. And I would just add that, again, as I described to everybody here tonight, what my history is with the department, my background is, I've always referred to this IVH, great to see it, by the way. I've always described this as a true collaborative effort. And this really is a team effort to oversight, into misconduct, which really is not just with the police department, right? It's in any walk of life. Private sector positions have their fair share of employee misconduct as well. But when you're talking about a government agency, it obviously affects the public in a very different way. So to have that transparency, to have a collaborative effort with community leaders, such as the CPRB, and others as well in our community to help out with that regard, it certainly gives us hope. And, we've had a track record of doing that. We also have, I'll add to, with state agencies like the Attorney General's Office, with the new laws that have been passed, where we're obligated now. It's not just a matter of a want to report any misconduct that gets reported to us internally to the State Attorney General's Office, for their oversight as well. So there are mechanisms in place now, I truly believe, more so than ever, to really give the community that sense of structure that needs to be in place.
Thank you so much. So in light of the recent uprising in national news and, so many things going on within our community, How has APD and OPS responded to improve police oversight, transparency, and relationships with the community?
I'll just start with, obviously going back to 2020, with the police collaborative reform effort that the mayor started, with multiple community leaders, as well as members of the police department, in those efforts. And I can only speak for my subgroup that I was involved in, which happened to be civilian oversight. I thought a lot of productive conversations came out of that, those meetings, which were lengthy, took place over a significant course of time. I know many are here tonight in person. I'm sure also joining us virtually. And again, I can only speak for myself. Now, I would only speak for myself here. I do feel those conversations were very productive. I've met friends now. I can call them friends that I probably would not have had a relationship with otherwise throughout those meetings that I still talk to this day. That I believe also have that reciprocated respect now into the inside of how the police department actually works, from the inside out. So that was really the first, in my opinion, the first wave of change, quite honestly. And yes, I know it came from a politician. I know it came from the governor's order to do that. But, the positive and silver lining to that are those healthy discussions, again, that I experienced, and I'm sure countless others that were involved in that process can attest to. We also have, things that were born out of those discussions that we put into place in actually, realistic terms of the police department, are overseeing our revisions to our general orders. It was very labor intensive. I took part in that as well, with members of the mayor's office as well as the city corporation counsel's office. Those orders are thankfully now publicly available to everybody. That was also a massive undertaking that was leading into 2020, that wasn't prevalent before. So that all preceded the civil unrest and some of the enforcement events that led to those changes. Those mechanisms were already in the works. That just helped accelerate it. So again, those general orders, which are the guides for our employees and how to act on a day-to-day basis, over 2,000 pages worth, are now publicly available. And as we continue to update those and revise them, those updates and revisions will become more available. So that's certainly one tool that I can attest to has been already implemented.
Thank you so much.
And I would add to that. So backing up, prior to my being placed in the position I am now as the commander of the Office of Professional Standards, I have a background in training in the department. I was heavily involved in training defensive tactics and de-escalation, things like this for years prior to this position. I was also in the unit sergeant in the unit special operations, which during the recent events of unrest and protest directly dealt with those events. Many of which, the overwhelming many of which were peaceful and positive, I think, for the community and the city. And then, of course, we had some instances where, in my opinion, it was people not from Albany that came in and created problems at some of those events that was unnecessary. When I got to this position, one change the department made that was not prior to me obtaining this position was they took the OPS commander and they also placed me in charge of the training unit, which has a direct influence on policy and procedure. And I think that was important and was very forward thinking. And I don't want to put him on the spot, but it was our deputy chief's idea, and I agree with it. To have the ability to see these complaints coming in, see what the community is talking about, and also have the ability to turn and also be in charge of what our training and our policy and our procedures roll out. And I think that was a very positive and a very good change in the police department. And I'm trying to make that work for the benefit of our department and the community to the best of my ability right now. And it's great that I have a lot of support from the chief's office on that. One other thing that I think has changed is our increased communication with, I think, the CPRB. One big change we did was we realized that A lot of the CPRB members are, this is volunteers, they're all volunteers, they're not getting paid, they do this on their own time. So to have them come in to our office during our business hours, many of them, are working during those hours. We discussed it and we thought, we have to come up with a way to make the information that the CPRB needs much more available to them, much more access. So we did come up with an electronic sharing system that I think, and it's just beginning, it's kind of just started, but it's working out great, and I think it's going to get even better as we move on. We're also attempting to restructure the Office of Professional Standards. A lot of people think that all we do is citizen complaints. That is a small part of what we do. We are an extremely busy office. There are a lot of responsibilities in our office. We do all the hiring for the department, the entire hiring process. We take care of all the medical issues in the department. And we also have a lot of internal self-generated investigations. In fact, a lot of the investigations that are high profile or that result in a lot of perhaps some serious discipline usually are self-generated. And it's things that we picked up on ourselves and that we examine ourselves. So our office also is in charge of all FOIA requests. So we have a lot of responsibilities, and as most places around the country, we have a certain amount of staffing to deal with that. So what I'm attempting to do is restructure some of those responsibilities and try to shift some of those responsibilities to perhaps other areas of the department, which will allow us and give my detectives more time to, I think, focus on the truly important work, which are those internal investigations and the complaints that come in from the community. So I think all of these changes that are ongoing and have and are happening are certainly a direct result of a lot of the things that happened over the last several years. The other thing that we recently did was to be honest, I think among the rank and file, when they think of OPS, certainly when they think of internal affairs, you can imagine that they have a little bit of an attitude towards us. We're in the unfortunate position often of not only, say, being looked at not quite positively by our own, but also externally. So we kind of get squeezed on both sides. So one thing we wanted to do was try and put out to our rank and file that one, our office, we are not a bunch of scary individuals for them, and that the CPRB are not a bunch of scary individuals for them to worry about. That the CPRB and OPS are fair-minded, objective, and we want to do the right thing. So one thing that we did was we brought the CPRB into the curriculum of our training academy. They now have their own class. They submit their own curriculum, their own lesson plan. We submit that to the state, and it's part of our training academy. And the first iteration of this was in the police academy that we have going right now. And I have to say the feedback was very, very good, very well received. And I think if we can continue that, and we can dispel some of the myths, both about OPS and about the CPRB, as we put these new recruits out on the street and they're police officers, I think that's going to increase community engagement. It's going to increase the officers' trust with the community that is providing oversight to them. And I think we have a good future ahead of us.
Thank you so much. So you were talking a little bit about, and then Barbara Smith will be next, you were talking about creating policies and procedures and training. Is your staff trained in social determinants of health and trauma-informed care?
I'm sorry, I'm not
familiar. Oh, okay, so that we will definitely connect on that. Mental health, housing issues, past trauma, lack of having the proper community space to have recreation, people that are struggling without having living wages, the homeless population, and so on and so forth. But I would love for Barbara Smith to ask her question.
Thank you so much, Eva. My question is actually tied in some ways to what you just were talking about. I was wondering if the department has done any shifting of responsibilities around certain calls. One of the things that was being lifted during the time that there was so much organizing and visible protest in the country back in 2020 after George Floyd was murdered was that do the police need to handle every single kind of public safety issue, particularly around health and mental health, and that's what I think Eva was also getting at. I think you were talking about understanding how mental health and health affect people's response to, response to the police. What I'm interested in is like, when there's a mental health call in particular, do you do anything different now than what you used to do?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the Accord program that I know is still kind of on the preliminary stages is something that we are going to move forward with in assistance with the county. We still have a couple of non-sworn positions, again, came out of the collaborative reform effort, that are posted right now. They're victim advocate positions, specifically designed to help those in need, for a variety of issues. So those positions are posted. We don't have those filled quite yet. We're still waiting for applicants and candidates to come through that process. As far as our officers are concerned, they still are trained in mental health laws to assist them to get them the proper, positioning for those individuals that are in a state of crisis. We do have an internal group of officers that are specifically trained to help deal with that when available, because of our staffing shortages, when available, are able to respond to those calls to assist, patrol officers that may not have that specified training. We've been doing that actually for years, but they are also referred as a follow-up too after that call for service. So even if that once that call for service on any given day or night is resolved, they're referred to our internal team of officers that are specially trained for that to provide further assistance for that individual.
And did you say, like, are you working with social work or mental health providers? What was not quite in place, is that going to include
Yes.
positions you mentioned?
Yes, yes. So Commander Nora Harrington is actually one of our lead advocates for that cause, and they have been working with those groups for quite some time now. You're welcome.
Thank you so very much. We could talk about this for hours, I'm really ready to sit down, pull up a chair and really get to work. But later on, AVillage, as far as myself as executive director, our board president are very willing to work with the police department to look at equitable ways to address some of these issues. And some of those things is connecting to certain trainings and certain information about the social determinants of health, about trauma-informed care. I also suggest definitely, if not already, the police department work directly with Urban Grief, which is a leading organization that focuses on those things as well. And now we have about 10 minutes. 10 minutes, I'm gonna say 10 minutes. We have exactly 10 minutes to open the floor to any questions from the audience. I got shot. I guess, thank you. Mark, stand up.
You had mentioned earlier about discipline. Can you clarify when you said you could make recommendations on discipline?
Just for the Zoom, Mark asked a question about elaborating on discipline.
So written into local law J, the language is a little broad, but it does say that the CPRB has the power to discipline. It goes on to say that the board will, in conjunction with the chief, create a discipline matrix, and that's the part of the process that we're in now. So when the matrix is complete, we will review our cases or independently investigate our cases, and then we will recommend discipline. But as it's written, the chief accepts or doesn't accept that recommendation, and then has to provide back to us a reason, whether or not it was implemented or not. So that is our disciplinary power now from our legislation.
And just to follow up on that, how is the relationship with the police union? That wasn't mentioned tonight.
With the administration,
Yes, well, with this whole,
well, I'll speak for the police department obviously first. I mean, we have a very, very good working relationship, thankfully, with both of our main police unions. First being the Albany Police, Albany Police Supervisor Association, the APSA unit, which oversees our sergeants and lieutenants. Then we have our Police Benevolent Association, which is our officers and detectives. Again, having been in the department for a number of years, I served on the police union board years and years ago. Hasn't always been the case over the course of time, full disclosure. And I'm happy to say that now currently, we do have a very, very strong relationship with both unions. And in fact, I've invited them multiple times to meetings that we've had with the CPRB. They've accepted those invitations and have actually participated in those discussions. I'll let Nairobi elaborate more.
I would echo what the deputy chief said. I think just in 2022, like I said, trying to bring all stakeholders to the table. We talk a lot about our relationship with the community, but we have made efforts to bring the union in so that some of the decisions that we're making, they're at the table. We've heard them say before that they haven't had a say. So when we were negotiating our confidentiality agreement, we worked closely with the commander and deputy chief, and then we also had a meeting where we didn't have to, but we brought in the union, we brought in their council and discussed a few issues that they had. Additionally, the working group for the disciplinary matrix, it includes Mark Mishler, who's here today, and Tabitha Wilson as community stakeholders, myself, Dr. Vivian Hardin and Batman from the CPRB, the commander, deputy chief, and the chief for APD, but also Josiah Jones, who is the president for APSA, and the vice president as well, are part of that working group. So they came to our public meeting, they made comments, and the hope is that going forward, when we start to have these bi-weekly meetings, the first of which, the first public one will be on the 22nd, is that everybody brings their viewpoints to the table. It's all in public, everybody can tune in, and nobody's voice gets left out of that process. So we're building that relationship with you.
Can I also give an answer to this question? Just from the standpoint of a community member, unfortunately, there's a history in Albany and in other places of police unions playing a very divisive, incendiary role on social media, for example, and so on. We've certainly seen that in Albany. It is very counterproductive. It is their social media kind of presence is remains stuck in an old, them and us kind of mentality, and obviously they are stakeholders. They should be involved in the process. No question about that. I'm glad that they're meeting with the board. I'm glad that they're going to be part of the matrix decision process. But I think there's some history that is extraordinarily problematic in Albany in regard to their role.
I can just add one more thing, Mark, just to also add on to that. It's obviously very, very important for us to have their buy-in for obvious reasons. The collective bargaining agreements really dictate how that process comes out. They all have due process available to them once discipline is actually initiated against an employee of the department. So once again, I'm not just saying this for a shout out, but Lieutenant Josiah Jones and Officer Mike Delano have been phenomenal and very open to discussions and willing to participate pretty much in every single term that we've asked them to, because it is important for their voice to be heard. So,
thank you so much. I do have a question in the chat, and the question is, are the options to file a complaint the same if law enforcement personnel is from the Albany County Sheriff's Department?
So we only handle the City of Albany City Police. The Sheriff's Department have their own, I guess I have a counterpart there they have an Office of Professional Standards and Internal Affairs themselves. So the complaint, and that happens sometimes. We will get complaints where we start looking into it and we realize, oh, this is a sheriff's deputy, or this is a state trooper that was working in Albany. And we have no jurisdiction over that event. What my office does is we take those complaints and I forward them to my counterparts in those agencies and say, this came in, it is not our officer, but I believe it's one of yours, and then they take it from there.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? We have about 1 minute. Oh, Lord. We have a lot of questions. Quick questions and quick responses. Okay, go ahead. Let's start with Tabitha. I'm gonna let you go last because I'm about to call you and Nairobi up to close out. Lisa Good, and who else had their hand up? All right, I can't recognize faces with masks on, but gentleman in the back, and a beautiful woman with the gray hair in the middle. Go ahead, Miss Lisa.
Hi, so my question is, I deal with survivors, people who have been harmed by violence, and some of the things that are presented to me about how they're treated, they don't border, I don't know where to put that. And so I think what I would like to know is, what are your recommendations to deal with some of that? Do you want it to come forward in the form of a complaint? Because, there's a double bind there that they're relying on you either for safety, or they're relying on you to move an investigation forward, or they're relying on you to see them as a victim and not as a potentially involved in the situation or whatever. But some of the things that get presented to me are really, really quite disturbing. And it's different when they come and, as part of what I do, it comes up, but it's something completely different when they're on the phone and I'm asking them to make calls as per New York State, their rights as victims, and I'm hearing things firsthand that just drop me to my knees. And now I'm in a situation to where I'm mediating and smoothing things over and saying, okay, you know what, no, let me call this person. I know this person, and maybe that can help. So I just want to know how should I position those kinds of things that don't quite maybe rise to a complaint, but some things are very harmful and very, very disturbing. And so I'm kind of like in the middle, and I just want to know what to do with some of those things.
Yeah, Lisa, thank you very much. That's a very important question. Nairobi and I think we can probably both tackle this question. From the police department standpoint, if it's something that's investigatively already been, taking place or it's already active, or if it's something that's being reported to, a station house or patrol officer, I know you don't want to give specifics, but if it's something at the preliminary level, certainly the supervisory route is one option to go in. To ask to speak to a supervisor to see kind of where things are, if it's more of an update case-wise, if they're not receiving timely notifications and updates to how that case is progressing, that's certainly one area to go in. But I will say if it's a tactful thing, if it's something that requires more attention, which it sounds like there might be some instances that you're describing may warrant that, then certainly a complaint or something, a notification of the Office of Professional Standards may be warranted. It certainly can never hurt, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, simply. If you're in doubt, contact the Office of Professional Standards and they will vet that appropriately and make sure that the detective in the OPS, that feels that, preliminary complaint, make sure that person gets the right service.
If I could just add, we look into everything that comes in. And there are often times where something may not rise to the level where, hey, somebody violated policy or a rule where we can discipline. But there certainly are policy, procedure, and training lessons that we can take out of those. So we encourage those to come to our office, and we will deal with them accordingly and look into them. And sometimes it means that, you know what, maybe this isn't a complaint, but we have to look at our policy regarding this. We have to look at our procedure. Or it could be as simple as, I need to reach out to a supervisor on this who can reach out to this complainant and maybe answer some of their questions. So we encourage those to come in, even if they think maybe this isn't necessarily a complaint. We can at least point them in the right direction or address it in a different way other than a disciplinary issue.
And I'll just follow up from the board's perspective and say, please absolutely share. I agree with, there's always the complaint route, that is always an option. We've had other instances that have, like when I said, approach one of our members, like at community events, we've had those things happen where, you know, I'll call the commander and say, do you know about this? I heard about this. So there's ways to handle it in an official complaint capacity. There's also, like, you need to look into this. We're hearing that these things are happening. What's going on? Are you aware of this? And then as I started talking about in the presentation, if it's something that, you know, both parties have to agree, the officer and the person that, the complainant, but there's also the option for mediation. If the person is experiencing something where they just want to talk to the officer and talk it out, that is a non-punitive method, but starts those conversations. So there are a lot of different options to handle them, but I would say please share, even if it isn't coming from the person, even if it's coming from you, to say, you know, this person doesn't want to file a complaint, but this is what is happening, and can you just look into it without, you know, with anonymous reporting, we will find a way to, you know, resolve the issue to the best of our ability.
And we don't need an official complaint to investigate something. There's often times where a citizen will say, you know, you should know about this, but I'm not putting in an official complaint. And we will launch our own internal administrative investigation. And that happens often, I would say. So I would encourage any citizen who do not have to file a formal complaint, comes in with information, we look at it and we take it serious.
Thank you so very much, and I just want to insert to say, I think this is an open door for us to, you know, reimagine how we address these issues, especially centered around trauma, especially centered around the issues that happen with gun violence and community violence. And again, I'm going to say that Lisa Good is probably the first person I would suggest you work with regarding that. And our two last questions, they're gonna kick us out, okay? They do not play here at Albany Public Library. But the next two questions, and then we're gonna have our closing remarks by Tabitha Wilson and Nairobi.
Hi, my name is Renee Harrison, I live in City of Albany, and I have a question for the two. Do I have to?
No.
No,
speak up. Project, speak up.
Speak up, thank you. I have a question for the two officers. You mentioned about the history of and knowledge about de-escalation, and the issue of mental health came up. And I know, you know, you were very clear that there are still some positions that you're going to fill in terms of dealing with a mental health crisis. But the other thing that has gone on within the past 7 years, and even more than the past 7 years, especially because of COVID, but not only because of COVID, is an increase in the number of people who are suffering from mental health conditions. And there might not be a call for it that is a crisis, but the person might be suffering from these conditions. There's also, more than just a couple of years, a tremendous increase in the number of people who are on the spectrum, who might deal with a situation with a police officer in a way that a police officer is not necessarily prepared for. So it's really a question for both of you. Are there policies in place for dealing with those kinds of situations so that the situation does get de-escalated and we don't have a situation where a complaint has to be filed or someone dies
I mean, from a policy, thank you very much for the question, by the way. As far as policy goes, our de-escalation portion of our use of force policy itself has been revised multiple times since about 2016, really. It's evolved over time, as has our training standards evolved over time. Obviously, our officers are trained from the academy level. I'll let the commander speak a little bit more to that effect. We do have autism level training that our entire staff has gone through from top down over the years as well to kind of identify those in need in that regard to what you spoke to. But again, sworn officers are wearing many, many different hats when responding to calls for service. So it's an imperfect science, I guess, is the best way to answer your question, other than the fact that we do have policies in place to make sure that these officers try to de-escalate a situation for a person that's in a state of crisis that they may not even know they're in a state of crisis, to your point. And those officers go through not only educational training, academic training at the academy level, but also practical training through scenario-based incidents as well. Again, I don't want to steal the commander's thunder here, but we also have virtual reality training that we are starting to bring out online too, that can bring a whole different aspect of things, again, at the academy level, so that our officers are seeing things in a very different light. When you have role players involved, there's room for human error. But when you have a scenario that's already kind of preloaded and it evolves, with our training, that's been very helpful. And we've seen through studies across the nation that that's been very helpful. So we're very, very lucky to have that technology at our disposal, specifically through the company Axon, which also happens to manufacture the tasers. So that is kind of all intertwined. But Commander, if you want to speak more to the training aspect of that.
You stole a lot of what I was going to say. On the training end, we have a lot of, I think technology is really changing a lot of the game. We recently, especially with the company Axon that I mentioned, we went into a pretty decent contract with them, and we have some very good training coming our ways. The virtual reality training is actually quite excellent. There's lots of scenario-based, there's lots of scenarios in it, it's very realistic. It forces the officer to be in a position where they have to make forced decisions. When I first got into policing some 19 years ago, the tactics for what we call defensive tactics were a lot different. And there was a lot of physical parts of that were big then. Over the years, I also have a background in some martial arts myself, and I had different ideas on how things should go. So over the time, both myself and some other defensive tactics instructors who had different ideas did work with New York State, and the tactics are completely different from what they used to be. Things like positional asphyxia that I personally have been teaching for 10 years. Those are things that we have been teaching people about for a long time. Positional asphyxia is very related to what happened in the George Floyd incident. And we have been teaching officers for a long time, well before that happened, about the dangers of putting people in certain vulnerable positions, and that we need to sit them up. There's a lot, but we've been involved in that for a long time. Our training has evolved greatly, especially in defensive tactics. It used to be all the scenarios when I first started were fighting scenarios, always going to something on a tool on the tool belt, as we called it, or physical. A lot of our scenarios are intentionally designed to be winnable without resorting to physical force or any sort of violence. And we really push that. And de-escalation is a huge part that we intertwine with our defensive tactics. And they will lose a lot of scenarios if they don't try those tactics. So we've been doing this for a while, and we've really ramped it up. And our partnership with Axon and some of the technology advances that are going to allow us to do some very exciting training, I think are going to increase that quite a bit.
Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
I'm so sorry, I know you wanted to keep it short, but just to kind of wrap all that up into one distinct answer. We want to give as much detail as possible to answer your question, but the reality is, at the end of the day, officers are now trained to talk, right? To deal with communication skills more than anything else ever before. And again, that trend has been evolving rapidly for a number of years, but it's no more prevalent today than it ever has been. So again, across the nation, certainly here at home in the city of Albany, a sworn police officer is right from the get-go, right from the academy level, and for our veteran officers trained through in-service training now to deal with situations, through talking and communicating. And obviously, if you need more assistance with somebody that has more subject matter expert, level training, whether it's a crisis intervention because of mental health or otherwise, to contact those individuals to come out to the call for service, it is safe to do so and help that individual. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much to our panel. We have one more question. I know you guys are ready to clap. My feet is hurting, so I know I've been here for a while. But this is a very important conversation, and again, we can go on and on. I'm going to welcome Tabitha Wilson up from AVillage, and we're going to welcome our last question. Please answer as fast as possible because they're watching us out the back door. And as executive director of AVillage, it is my priority to advocate for our community, lift their voices even when they're not present, to make sure that we're working with our community stakeholders, including the police department, to make sure that we are addressing things as equitable as possible. So I look forward to building a stronger relationship and working with the police department to create equity in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bypass my question because this is only part one of part two events that we'll have. So actually, Lisa, good. Thank you so much for your question because it's sort of the tone and tenor of where we want to go with the second part, which this one, of course, was background and understanding foundationally what the CPRB, what they do. We, of course, want to incorporate the community's insight and their perspective in this as we go through the series. And there will be more in the series. We do hope to invite the chief to a conversation. And of course, thank you all for coming out in this unseasonably warm weather. That should probably be one of our community conversations, climate change. And thank you to the library. Thank you so much to our panelists, as well as thank you to our sponsors, Zetapex, as well as the NICLU, New York Civil Liberties Union of the Capital Region, and one more person. Am I forgetting anyone? Well, thank you, Hamlin Visions, also for recording and giving your services to this event. And again, we invite you, as we continue to have these conversations, we will of course unpack more of what we talked about, more questions, and my question can wait till part two, is actually more themes for that. And I invite Nairobi to close us out, and thank you so much.
I will keep it short because I know we are getting kicked out, but I want to just say thank you to everyone here. Thank you especially to AVillage. Eva, you are a queen and you are hilarious. Thank you for making this heavy topic fun as possible. Thank you, Tabitha. Thank you to the board members that came out, and to very importantly to our community members. Thank you for our panelists. This was great to see. Everybody so involved and engaged, and I hope you just continue to put your trust and faith in the board, and we'll continue to work hard for you. So thank you all for coming tonight, and have a good night.